Hello, Jerry Beal here again on this audio. It's about Joe Arpaio, the sheriff of Maricopa County, Arizona, and I want to get a point across with the way he is and the way he treats his prisoners. So the title is Does Treating Prisoners Like Shit Cause Less of Them to Repeat? And the factual answer is hell no. And these facts have been in since 1997. I still have the newspaper. Here it's 2014, and I still have the newspaper from 1997. It was called Jail Doors Revolving. Jail Doors Revolving. And that's what this story is about. Showboat Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who is the sheriff of Maricopa County, Arizona, which includes Phoenix metropolitan area, and who also loves to be in front of the cameras, he still wallows around in his favorite title, America's Toughest Sheriff. Maybe some sensible person ought to tell him that's not something to be proud of. So he had a fairly expensive taxpayer-funded study done in 1997 to see how his very strict and demeaning disciplining treatment of his prisoners had lessened the number of repeaters because they were treated like shit during their time in his jails. I'm saying he takes great pride in treating them like shit. And that's what gets me. Well, that's what I choose to be upset about there mostly, is he takes great pride in treating them like shit. Among some of the obvious and even weird situations that he is using to demean the prisoners is that they have to wear pink underwear and dress in black and white broad-striped uniforms and eat green bologna. But probably the worst thing is the prisoners also live in big, large tents in those hot Phoenix days and nights, where the temperature can reach well over 100 degrees even in the nighttime. Also, Arpaio's deputies, knowing they can abuse the prisoners and treat them like shit without getting in trouble with him, and during Arpaio's stay, more than a few prisoners have been murdered by the prison guards themselves, which reminds me of the Shawshank Redemption movie. And those that have seen that movie know what I'm talking about, but that was supposed to have been taking place back in the 1930s. One particular murder that took place where I knew someone who knew the parents of one of the prisoners that got murdered. Their son had been picked up that day on disorderly conduct charges and had been strapped in a holding chair that they loved to use. I guess they felt like they weren't controlling him enough or something. And while he was in that chair, now think about this, while he was in that chair, totally defenseless, tied down and gagged, he was beaten to death that way. Just think about it. You know, how would you like your son to be tied down by the police, by law enforcement, police officers, peace officers they like to call themselves, tied down in a chair, totally defenseless, and bound and gagged? He was beaten to death that way. Of course, his parents were furious, and they were also pretty well-to-do, and so they hired a good lawyer to go after Arpaio, which is almost the most futile thing you can do, is go after him, because he's so tied in to the city government there. And they almost got that SOB either canned or run up on charges. It almost happened, but it didn't. But there's just too much politics with this guy. As I said, he has the goods on some politicians, and they have the goods on him, and so they don't go after each other for mutual reasons. I think about Arpaio's demeanor as being a combination of a Barney Fife personality with an Al Capone meanness and mentality. That's the way I think of him, with a Barney Fife personality and an Al Capone meanness and mentality. He would cut quite a funny figure if he weren't so uncaring about others. People often laugh, and besides, Barney, good old Barney, was the deputy. He wasn't the sheriff, This guy's the sheriff. People often laugh at his antics, but they still vote that SOB into office each time. I know because I've talked to quite a few. In fact, I talked to one of the guards there at the who also was working part-time at Domino's Pizza, and I asked him about Sheriff Joe, and he would not talk. He said, I won't talk about that at all, because he gets fired. That's why. His deputies are scared to death to say in one bad word about Arpaio. He is just too much. He's too powerful in that position when he's so corrupt himself. But way too many people believe what he believes, that the shittier the prisoners are treated, the less they'll repeat their crimes. It's the same caveman mentality that the worse a person is treated, the better they'll behave. You know, that kind of mentality. In fact, Doctor of Psychology Jose Liba, who is superintendent of Isaac School District in Phoenix, Arizona, is giving parents advice like this. Discipline early, stick firmly to the rules, and punish consistently. Think about that. Oh, knowing what I know now, that's the worst advice to parents that could ever be given. It leads them right into hell. So when the children leave the prison of their own homes and families, you know, discipline early, stick firmly to the rules, and punish consistently. So when the children leave the prison of their own homes and families, they transition to the prison Arpaio is running right down the street, never missing a step. What a damned waste of time and life for those precious children growing up in such horrible ignorance. All this being said, and relative to the study I was talking about, Arpaio's hopes and wishes were dashed to pieces when the study came back that his lousy and demeaning treatment of the prisoners in his custody had had no effect at all in lessening the number of repeaters. Let me say that again. The taxpayer-funded study came back to prove that his lousy and shitty treatment of those prisoners had had no effect at all in lessening the number of repeaters. The interviews with the prisoners in the study, the interviews with the prisoners and former prisoners that were done in the study, did prove that they hated their stays in his jails, and they hated being treated like shit, and they hated him, and now they hate him even more. But the repeaters are back again, only more angry than ever. I remember those words from that article, jail doors revolving. That they're back again, only they're more angry than ever. So let's get this straight right now. Treating people with bad behavior surely doesn't cause them to be better behaved. In fact, I'm sure studies can prove that the better people are treated by others, the better their behavior will be. That's just simple cause and effect. And that comes by way of cause and effect. The reason for the prisoners repeating is the same all the time. Listen to this. You'll get this one. Bad boys are bad boys because they're bad boys. Self-identified, reinforced, and cycling. Again, bad boys are bad boys because they're bad boys. Self-identified, reinforced, and cycling. Here again is the most useful quote I've ever come across relative to dealing with human behavior and even human decision-making on purpose. And I'll quote it word for word. It comes from A Course in Miracles, the most useful quote I've ever heard. I'll quote it, and then I'll come back and I'll explain it a little bit more the way I have it. Here it is. Every decision you make, that's a lot. Well, I better not. Every decision you make stems from what you think you are and represents the value you put upon yourself. What you think you are can be very hateful, and what this strange image makes you do can be very destructive, and yet the destruction is no more real than the image is. the last sentence there is just a reinforce or a reiteration of what A Course in Miracles says all through the text, and that's that nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. I'll leave it at that for now, because what it's saying is, even though there's all this destruction, yet nothing real can be threatened and nothing unreal exists. So here's the way I think about that quote. Every decision you make stems from what you think you are, which are your senses of self. And we get our senses of self by what we're believing others are believing about us. That comes from Charles Cooley. You know, not what they're believing about us, but what we believe they're believing about us. And that represents the value you put upon yourself. What you think you are, which again is one or more senses of selves, can be very hateful. Like Arpaio's prisoners feel hated and abused, and like those who carry around the label sex offender. So what you think you are can be very hateful, and what this strange image makes you do, can be very destructive. And boy, am I ever a testimony of that. You know, if you go into my life story, you'll realize how strong these bad guy sense of selves are and what they make you do. I know that everybody has felt helpless from time to time with various behaviors that they've had. I know that everybody has some experience that way. So the prisoners are treated like shit, they feel like shit, then they believe they deserve to be treated like shit, you know, which causes them to act out with bad behavior. You know, what you think you are and what it makes you do, that self-image makes you do, and that's to act out with bad behavior relative to the investment they have in their bad guy sense of self. When Social Evolution Institution gets up and running, we're certainly going to demand to be able to go into jails and prisons to teach and prove to these prisoners that the person they think they are is certainly not the life entity that they really are. And yet the life entity that they really are is the one experiencing and expressing. It's the one that feels. It's the one that reasons. That's you. But that's not who you think you are. You know, that one is very lofty. That's the creator side, you know. But it's not the body, you know. The self we really are is not the body-oriented sense of self and sense of selves that we think we are. For what we think we are certainly can't be what we really are. You know, we're the one thinking it. You know, so we conjure up in our mind what we are, and it changes a little bit from time to time, but it's still an image. It's still a vision of myself. You know, it's a sense of myself. It's not me. And that's the way we go through this life, at least in time-space. We're always acting, as Shakespeare said, all the world is a stage, and we're only actors upon the stage, at least our bodies and the sense of selves that we act out. Thus, in a similar way Catholics go to confession and believe they've been forgiven, the prisoners can bypass that kind of game playing and just use the truth and cause and effect to their great advantage in truly and honestly dismissing and even reassigning their past behavior to the role playing that they got caught up in, which is over and done with. You know, like Gene Hackman is I think he's my favorite role player, and he plays the bad guy quite a bit, but when he gets done on set, he just goes home. He doesn't get arrested, and he does, because he knows it's a role, and everybody knows it's a role. It's just that we don't realize that here and now, when he goes home, he's also role playing some kind of thing with Gene Hackman, you know, an actor, and many different ways of role playing. And then they can use getting this information, then the prisoners can use that most wonderful cause of behavior and even the cause of human decision making, that in the natural flow of it, is a demonstration of what is seen as good and appropriate behavior. I'm talking about a cause that they can use. And so here's the cause that they can use, and everybody can use and ought to, because it's the truth. And here it is. I am, and by the way, I am are creative words. You know, that's the name of God, is I am. That's why the kingdom of heaven is within us. I am is within us. Anyway, I am, by the way, and whatever follows those two words, in the personal context, our sense of self is found projected into and expressing and experiencing through. See, that's what triggers this, and the mind obeys I am and gives us the experience of the I ams that we think we are. And so that cause is, I am perfectly okay, just the way I was, am, and will be. And see, that's the truth about the one who is experiencing. Or if it isn't, we wouldn't know, because we're the cause self, only pretending the roles of effect self here in time-space. But what prisoner believes that about themselves? You know, I am perfectly okay just the way I was, am, and will be. Because whoever truly believes that, then they are that way. Their behavior is always okay just the way it is. You know, the prisoners don't believe that about themselves. They believe they're plenty guilty. That ugly word guilt. And of course in Miracles about the word guilt says, guilt is totally insane and has no reason. That's the biggest point. It has no reason. No reason to be using guilt at all. And boy, would I like to have that conversation. Why are we using guilt in our world anyway? We can just have whatever we want against the law and just deal with it that way. We don't have to run around here and say you're bad and you're good and all that kind of bullshit that separates and blocks us and makes a mess of our lives. Only on occasion, when the person has learned the truth and applied the truth to themselves, does this cause-effect relationship work, as I said. But it works magnificently. Believe me, I know. Because of the way I used to be and the way I am now, I am just a living example of that. So you throw, because I used to be, you know, what you consider a very bad guy, only that I never harmed anybody. I won't get into that, but you can read it on part of the website. So you throw away your past supposed bad behavior to the role-playing it's always been. And just as the prodigal son, think about the prodigal son who was accepted back by his father simply because he's the son of his father, and for no other qualifying reason. We can and ought to accept ourselves unconditionally the same way, simply because of what we really are, and not because we qualified in various ways to be acceptable. This is how we align cause where cause goes and effect where it goes as well. Firstly, we truly believe we're okay and not for any qualifying reason, and then that makes other people okay, by the way, and not any qualifying reason. And then secondly, we automatically behave in okay ways, and that's simply cause and effect. Then in believing you are perfectly okay just the way you were, are, and will be, because you're not the person you thought you were anyway, you're using cause and effect on purpose. For what you think you are, which has changed from sometimes I'm a good guy and sometimes I'm a bad guy, to being unconditionally self-accepting all the time, automatically causes what we think of as bad behavior to disappear into the illusion it's always been. For only when the care and keeping of bodies is the issue are we clear on what bad behavior is anyway. You see, that's the only way we know for sure. We can use facts to determine what bad behavior is when the care and keeping of bodies is the issue. Beyond that, there's no such thing as bad behavior. I'm saying there's no factual or truthful way to arrive at what bad behavior is anyway. No measures, that aren't a matter of interpretation. See, we think they're a matter of fact, but they're a matter of interpretation. As I said, for all that kind of thing is a matter of interpretation, certainly not a matter of fact. Of course we ought to treat others as we would want to be treated, and we need to obey the legal laws and then pitch in and change the legal laws to be aligned with right-minded thinking, as in correct-minded thinking, when they aren't aligned with right-minded thinking, as in correct-minded thinking. And that's what the Social Evolution Institution is all about, is the extension of right-minded thinking into the world. The very sad part about this story is that Arpaio spent that taxpayer money to prove what didn't get proved. He was sure he could prove that his shitty treatment of the prisoners would make being in jail so intolerable that they surely wouldn't get in trouble again, just to avoid going back to his jails and to avoid more shitty treatment by him. But he was incorrect about that. He was incorrect about what he thought would work. You know, he was wrong. I don't like to use the word wrong because it gets confused with the moral word wrong, which should never be in our language at all. The word wrong morally. Anyway, so he was incorrect about what he thought would work. He was avoiding cause and effect relative to human behavior and even human decision making. And so what did he do? When he saw that it didn't affect the repeaters at all, you'd think he would change and do something differently, but he didn't. He didn't change his terrible treatment of the prisoners. Hell no. He completely ignored the facts of the study and has kept on treating those prisoners like shit. Thus the phrase in the New Testament, forever learning and never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. What goes around comes around is our karmic scenarios. It's how we learn the hard way. Boy, do I know that, how you learn the hard way, you know. Sometime in a future present, Arpaio is guaranteed to find himself being treated like shit, so he can feel and experience what he put people through. But even that isn't for punishment. It's the progressive way, and as I noticed that the only way, it's the progressive way and the only way we seem to be able to leave all of our attachments to the material world behind, so that we can awake and arise on higher plateaus of understanding and enlightenment. So thanks for listening to this presentation, and please feel free to explore around on the website.